Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us again. And today I'm joined by Miriam, who we've spoken to previously, but Miriam has spoken to us in her telling us about her situation of being estranged from her son and her grandchildren. Today is a little different. Miriam is going to talk to us as she was an alienated grandchild herself. And I think it's really important that we actually listen to adult alienated children now. And Miriam is very happy to talk to us this afternoon about that. So Miriam, would you like to kick it off with what your experiences were?
Yes, I'll say first of all, Jane, obviously when I joined the group, it was as an alienated granny. And I put all the other stuff on one side. And it's come up more and more in my mind as the years of alienation from my children and my grandchildren, and I'm now in my 9th year, goes on, that there's a pattern and a history. So I'm the second of 4 children. I had, my brother's no longer alive. He was a year and a half older than me. And then I have 2 younger sisters. And we grew up in, my parents were both teachers, sort of professional people, but we grew up in a very austere, cold atmosphere, and certainly an atmosphere where you didn't talk about your feelings and feelings weren't shown. You know, it was very, I think of its era, it was very much, this is adult stuff and you're children and you'll know what we want you to know. So as a young child, it didn't really cross my mind that we were this family of 6 who didn't really have anyone else, as in extended family. And obviously, as you go to school, and I was rather late going to school because my father was in the army and we lived abroad until I was 7. So it didn't crop up there. But when we came back to England and started making friends and having a life, it occurred to me that other children, my friends, had grannies, had nans, had granddads, had this sort of, to me, wonderful extended family. And it was always, one Saturday I go to my nan, and my mum doesn't let me have sweets, you know, but when I go to my nan, she gives me pocket money. So I think something as a grandparent I'm familiar with, as a grandchild not. And because we couldn't really talk to our mum or our dad, you know, there was neither of them with a soft one you could go to and say, you know, somebody was horrible to me. They'd be inclined to say, well, what did you do? And I started to think, I think I thought before I spoke it, that I wanted to have a nan, and started to talk to my brother and my next sister about it, and they felt very much the same as I did. You know, where is our granny? And we knew we had granny because every Christmas we would get a parcel and there'd be presents for all 4 of us and a card from Granny and Uncle Jim, her unmarried son. My grandfather was dead. And I knew that, I came to know that my other grandparents, my paternal grandparents, had died. My grandmother had died the year I was born. So there was nothing on that side. And that's when we first started to say, you know, where's Granny? Where is the Granny? Granny G. And my mother's response was always the same. It was, we don't talk about her, she wasn't very nice. And when you're a child and your parents say that, you take it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But we obviously thought about it in our own ways. And we sort of, I suppose, built up a fantasy almost of this mysterious granny who was all things good in our minds, because I didn't really know anyone with a nasty granny, because I don't think grannies are particularly nasty. It was always, oh yeah, I was at my nan's for tea and she made a lovely cake. And sort of fast forward, really, so it grumbled, and what I'd occasionally, I was quite outspoken, certainly, yes, I was quite outspoken, my mum, and I said, you know, I want to talk about Granny, and she said, no, she lives a long way away, which she did. We lived in the south and she lived in the north of England, so it was a long time ago, a long way away, I beg your pardon, in the late 50s, early 60s, until we got into, if my sister was preteen, but I was actually working it out this morning, and I think when we really wouldn't accept it any longer, I think my brother was nearly 16, I was 14 and a half, 15, and my sister was about 12. And we said, look, it's enough of this talking. It's not the end of the world. We can go and find her. It was sort of, you know, said in a spirit of rebellion, probably after an argument. And I certainly know that my brother that by then had a Saturday job, and I was coming up to the Saturday job age. So we started to save. We lived in a small Devon town, but it had a train station. Obviously, that went out with beaching. It had a train station. And we were so independent because my mum always worked. We were used to, you know, going to the station, asking how much a ticket was and all this sort of thing. And I worked out, it took us about a year to get this plan together. We never dreamt of telling our parents or telling my little sister, because she would have told on us. Mm-hmm. And we saved up, and we had to make, I can't remember where, London maybe, but we saved up, bought tickets to Carlisle, and we looked in the not the yellow pages, we looked in the telephone directory at the post office, and we found our granny's address. Cool. And we didn't phone her, we didn't do anything, we didn't write, we did nothing. We eventually bought tickets, which must have been a completely normal thing for children to do. And we bought our tickets, and in the spirit of adventure, you know, took some money and bought some chocolate at the sweet shop when it was open. Took off really early in the morning, and on the train we made our way to Carlisle. And I won't go into all the ins and outs, but we got there. We found our granny's house, which was, you can still see it, a red brick terrace house. We had no idea. She could have been away on holiday. She could have been anywhere. Yeah. She could be dead, actually. But we left a note. We left a note for our parents. I said, we haven't run away, but we've gone to find our granny.
Wow.
Yes, and we'll be back, and we'll try not to get into any trouble. And it was pure defiance, you know. Yeah. So this old lady, to me, she was an old lady, but who my mother was a spitting image of, opened the door and looked at us, and I can still see it now. And I'm talking about, you know, a long time ago. And she said, you must be Joyce's children.
Gosh.
And Joyce was my mother, and she was the youngest of four herself. And you better come in. How did you get here? So we had this extraordinary visit, not emotional. She wasn't emotional at all. Mm. What sprung to mind was that she was bitter, actually. Okay. She was very pleased to see us, but she said words to the effect of, your mother always thought she was too good for this family. My mother was clever, and she went to the grammar school, and she was very proud of that, I know. And we had a visit, and said, you know, can you be our granny, our proper granny?
Wow.
She said, well, yeah, and it's an expression I always use. If I'm spared, of course, but I can't travel to you, but you're always welcome. And it was bittersweet, because it was our granny, and we were sort of looking at each other and very aware of this. And but there were no great hugs or kisses or tears, or there was she said things like, well, I know where you get your determination from, and you know, your that sort of thing, because she said your mother left for London, which she did to train as a nurse, and we never saw her again. And that's actually true. My mother never went home. Wow. And we found out a few things that we wanted to ask, you know, when did our granddad die, and who's Uncle Jim, and you know, did our mother live in this house, which she had. It was the house she'd been brought up with. And I don't know how long we were there for, because we had it all arranged, but only a couple of hours. And we got on the train and we went home. And so that was...
Wow, what an adventure.
Well, yes. And to just that part of my story, to put it to bed, that was actually just before she very quickly became senile and died.
Oh,
so she didn't live very long.
Oh, God.
And we never saw her again.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Gosh.
Yes, we never saw her again. We wrote to her and she wrote to us.
Okay.
We never saw her again.
Okay. And wow. I mean, obviously it sounds like something out of the famous Five, doesn't it, really?
Yeah. Well, yes, without the ginger beer. And,
yes, well, absolutely.
But three tired, hungry children, knowing they were in big trouble when they
got home. I mean, that's obviously what I'm now going to say is, you know, what happened when you got home?
We all got an absolute hiding of our lives.
Yeah.
On the grounds that, you know, extraordinarily, my mother asked nothing about her mum. And it was on the grounds, as parents will want to do, and I've probably done myself, of saying, you know, we've been worried sick, and you could have been, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And we also put, we weren't, and we didn't.
Yeah.
And how did you pay for it? You know, how did you pay for it? And we said we saved up our pocket money and our present money, and as children are, you know, we were enterprising, and we were very defiant and
very determined, obviously.
Very determined. That's, I don't know if that's even coming over, but I wanted a granny. I wanted not somebody else's granny, because I had a best friend whose mum used to hug me every time she saw me, which was every weekend. Big hug, and we'd have lovely tea with my friend Linda and I, and she'd make little Marmite sandwiches. She was absolutely perfect in my eyes. So I had sort of role models.
A surrogate.
Yes, but not my granny and our granny.
Can you put into words why that was so important to you?
Yes, I think so. My brother and I were close, but my brother he was a very good singer. He went to the cathedral school in Exeter and was a chorister. And so he was away all the time. And of course, choristers are always away at Christmas and at Easter. So I used to miss my brother very much. And my younger sister and I weren't so close. It's something I've talked about and written about. My mother, both my parents, very much discouraged us from having relationship with each other, siblings. Their philosophy was very much divide and conquer. They were incredibly hard on us and strict. We didn't have, I did it without any self-pity. It's a fact. I do not remember my childhood as being very happy because there was no one. It was that feeling that I was going to have someone who was my flesh and blood. I couldn't have expressed it like that. My flesh and blood, who was going to be there to I don't know, spoil me, love me, all the things I saw, because I was by no means the only person I knew of my friends. We were pretty much brought up similarly, but that had that special somebody that they belonged to.
Yes.
In reality, how much of that feeling we didn't have time to
find out.
Yes, to build up on it.
No.
But it then I was very glad of it, because she hadn't rejected us.
Yeah.
That was the first thing. She'd certainly in her way welcomed us with open arms. And when she did die, I was able to live a sort of alter ego, Miriam, that had this granny who did, who cuddled me if I had a tummy ache, and all those things that sustained me, and also, I suppose I should say, but also made me start to question my mother in particular. I don't know why I don't bring my father into it, because he was very influential, but I was terrified of him, and my mother idolized him. So everything was fed through my mother. And I certainly became very, very rebellious teenager. And I had this, I suppose you could say, weapon, although that's not how I thought of it. And I don't sort of like saying it, but when my mother laid down the law unfairly, you can't wear that short skirt, you will not go, I don't care who else is going to some party or whatever, you're not going. I used to say, why should you tell me what to do when you never listen to your own mum?
Yeah.
We certainly used our status, if you like, of estrangement against her. And she didn't justify it or explain it, but I came to see I've had a difficult relationship with my mother all my life, and she's still alive, although hardly really, and I still phone her every week, and I respect her, and in my way I love her enough to recognize that she must have been damaged herself in her own childhood, but that her way of coping with her own shortcomings, I don't want to get too psychological, but this is absolutely a fact, was to wait till I was the first one to have children, for me to have my children, and I had my first one when I was 18, was to absolutely embrace them wholeheartedly, and do everything she could to divide me from my children.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no question in my mind that I'm estranged now because of the relationship
Yes.
I had with my mother and my mother had with her family, which she's never explained.
Yes, I mean, that was something that I was going to ask you. Did she obviously never gave you any explanation as to why she didn't have anything to do with her mother?
She did. She said two things that I can remember. One was that for many years, her parents didn't speak to each other. They spoke through whoever was in the house.
Okay.
Uncle Jim was always in the house because he was a bachelor who lived at home with his mum until she died. And I met him later on and he was lovely. He was a lovely uncle after she died. And he said there was something that happened between them. They think one of them had an affair.
Okay.
And they never addressed a word to each other. And so that created a very difficult atmosphere for their children. And the other thing, and these are all anonymous and they're all dead now. And, you know, so I think it's reasonable to talk about it. My mother once said something that led me to think possibly that her elder brother, not my Uncle Jim, but her other brother had in some way maybe abused her.
Okay.
She said something unpleasant happened, and she said it to me just after my father died, when she was sort of inclined to be a bit more open. Yeah. And I said, you know, do you want to talk about it? And she said, no, I don't.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
I felt that was probably a case.
Yeah. So having found yourself being, I'm using the word alienated grandchild, but an estranged grandchild yourself, has that affected you in your adult life, do you think?
Yes, I think absolutely. Absolutely. In my young life, in my medium life, when I became a mother, and I had my daughter first, my parents disowned me because I'd become pregnant outside marriage. And they were, it was worse than the Victorians. I was, a pariah. And so they kicked me out. And I had two determinations. One was that I was going to keep my daughter, and I did stay with her father. And the other is that I was going to be a very protective mother. And I think my daughter was about 18 months old, and I had a sort of breakdown because I was frightened of anyone or anything harming her, to the point where I was frightened she would get germs. I've once found a hornet in the bedroom when she was in her crib, and I remember just being hysterical.
Yes.
And so I became anxious, I suppose you'd say, very anxious. I was worried about whether I could give her what she needed and how to be a mother. And looking back, I don't know how I did it, because I think I was a very good mother then. And I waited 7 years before I had my son, and by which time my parents had sort of come round to things, and I was married to their father by then. But yes, I wanted to be a sort of textbook mother. I used to read all the books, and I put an awful lot of pressure on myself. And I lived close to my parents, and for everything I did, my mother undermined everything I did. If I was overly affectionate. She'd say, you know, you ruined that child. And I remember once telling my daughter, you know, picking her up about her table manners, and my mother saying, "Oh, you know, you should have seen your mother when she was your age," you know. And so I couldn't stand up to my mum, even as an adult, and I couldn't really assert myself very well with my children. I tended to leave the discipline to their father. I just wanted to protect them, I suppose, from the experiences I'd had.
You'd had yourself.
Yeah, and yeah. I wanted them to have grandparents.
Yes.
And as luck would have it, their paternal grandmother was an alcoholic, so I couldn't leave them alone with her. But my mother just sort of, as I say, she just scooped them up.
Yes.
And she was going to be the best granny.
Yeah.
She was a good granny in her way. She gave them everything sort of materially, and was very energetic and I mean, she was an infant teacher, so she knew about children. But yeah. she particularly liked babies and small children.
Yeah.
But to me, she came in between that relationship that I built with my children, and I had no one else like a granny to sort of float it by.
So do you think the relationship that she had with your children has played a part in your own estrangement in some way?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think I'm in the, you know, unusual position. I'm not actually estranged from both my children. I do have contact with my daughter, but it's not a very close contact. It's sort of the odd text. And she is very close to my mother and became very, very close to my mother. So what Granny said to her was right. And she pulled my son into that. And I think when I had a very, very close relationship with my son, and right up after he got married, and my daughter couldn't have children as it happened, and my son and daughter-in-law had a long time. They had 5 years of trying. So they'd been married 5 years, and I thought everything was absolutely great. And the change came when they had their children.
Yes.
And their children are the exact same gap as between me and my brother. And she also, like me, my daughter-in-law had a girl and a boy. So I had a girl and a boy. My mother had boy-girl first, but you know, the two of us were close. My two children were close, and my grandchildren were close. And I think as their children started to get past the baby stage, and I had a lot to do with them, including childminding when my daughter-in-law went back to work. I think my son began to have thoughts about he doesn't like his granny. He doesn't like my mother. My son doesn't like my mother. And he always thought she was very manipulative. And he wanted to do something different again. He seemed to want to sort of protect them from our family dynamic. And wasn't the reason for our estrangement, but I'm quite convinced that the reason it's continued is because he just thought, I don't want any more to do with that sort of side of my family. Yeah. It's all his extended family is on his father's side, so my first husband.
Yes.
And on my French daughter-in-law's family, French family, and my second husband and I are redundant, I suppose. So yes, it's had a massive impact. It's not easy to describe in a, you know, in a sort of short chat. It's not easy to describe, but it's like the links of a chain, and it's pernicious, and it just, you know, if you give me one big wish, I would say I just wanted to be part of a normal family. I wanted a normal, loving mum and dad, you know, who would sometimes give me a clip round the ear, but sometimes, you know, well done.
Yeah.
So I would say that my parents turned out children very lacking in confidence, very insecure, very nervous, very, very anxious. But that we then turned out rather spoiled children, maybe. You know, I wanted mine to have everything.
Yeah.
Too much, I suppose.
I think we overcompensate, don't we, sometimes?
Yeah, I think so, probably. And then I think what I think is that it doesn't end there. What I fear is that my grandchildren will go through something similar to what my siblings and I went through.
Yes.
Because I do believe my granddaughter's now 12, she'll be 13 next birthday. And I believe she will say, you know, what about my granny? She's got a step granny, grandma, she's called, but what, you know, our real granny, where is she? Why don't you speak to her?
Yes.
It never ends well.
It doesn't. And actually, it never ends.
It never ends. Right. But that's the irony, isn't it?
Yes, isn't it?
That's the irony that whatever they've done and whatever their reason, which ostensibly was a little bit of a row.
Yes.
You know, 9 years ago. But whatever explanation they've given to the children, to my grandchildren, and whatever they think they've done it for, and
so the circle continues, doesn't it?
Yeah. And those children will want to know whether, if I was a you know, a murderer or somebody notorious for some good or bad reason, I still think every child wants to know their history and their family tree. And that's what I would say. You are doing something that you're trying to control, something that ultimately you can't. They will speak for themselves. Because if my parents could have controlled us, or if any parents could have controlled any children, it would have been us. Because we were frightened, really.
And yet you had this inner strength or defiance, that you were absolutely sure that you and your brother were going to go and try and find your granny, because she was clearly that important in your imagination.
Jane, she was everything that every granny I ever saw or heard about was, and she could never have lived up to it in a way. But the very fact that I saw her and saw what she looked like and saw the family likeness, it meant everything. Not all happy, but it put something to rest. And actually what it put to rest ultimately was that she wasn't a bad person. There wasn't this monster that, you know, my mum had created. She's no good, she's a bad woman, she's what, I don't know what, or if or what, whatever she was or did, she was my granny, and I had I don't like the word right. I don't think we should have too many rights, but if you take it in the right way, we did have the right to form our own relationship with our granny, our only living granny.
Yes. And I think you've just put it all so eloquently, about how we assume the grandchildren are thinking, how we assume our grandchildren are going to want to try and find out about us, because it is part of their history and part of their identity. And, you know, you and your siblings actually prove that beyond all doubt, that, you know, that is a very strong pull, that nobody really can, you can't describe it in words. It's something that's inside of you that drives you to do something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's perfectly possible that they may never think of me in their whole life, and they may never come and seek me out. But that's for them, and that obviously I want that absolutely to be their decision, and which is why I'm not one to ever want to take any kind of legal action. I never, I've done as I'm told and kept out of their lives. But I want, I so want to say to my son, who is still my son, and I think given the chance I could still communicate with, that I know what you're putting your children through. And whilst it, you know, it may be something that they never feel the lack of, it very probably will be. And I know how that feels, and it's not right.
No.
And it's not me they'll punish. It will be their parents they punish.
Yes.
I don't want that for my son.
No, of course you don't. Of course you don't. You know, that's the bigger picture, and that's why it's so important that people like you who have found themselves estranged from a grandparent have the courage, and it does take courage, to talk openly and honestly about it, because it's only by hearing somebody's own story that we can really understand what's going on inside somebody's head, particularly when they were children. I can't thank you enough for opening up today, and I know it will help a lot of people, Miriam. And it's just, yes, it's just incredibly sad for me to listen to your story, but actually shows immense courage and strength from you and your brother, to get on that train and go and seek your granny out, because all you wanted was a granny, and it, you know, that's not much to ask. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jen. If I could just finish on that, if any parents watching, and you know you've fallen out with your mom, just remember, it's not she suffers, I suffer, but it's your children. Think of the children. Don't do it.
I can't say any more than what you've just said, because you've just finished it perfectly. Thank you so much for your time, Miriam. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.